Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with a beautiful example of a Dutch Navy Luger. Now, I've done some videos on Dutch Lugers before, but the Dutch in the World War I, World War II time period have an army and a navy and a Dutch East Indies colonial military service, and all of these branches have their own different small arms and different procurement process and different service history. So today we're going to look at the Navy specifically. I'll link in the description below to some of the other Dutch Luger videos that I have previously, but the Navy one is a little bit different. So Dutch naval procurement of the Luger actually starts in 1918. The Netherlands were neutral throughout World War I. Impressively, they managed to remain neutral and not occupied during the First World War. And in 1918, the Dutch Naval Air Service, fairly new branch, they're looking for semi-automatic pistols for pilots and observers. They have revolvers. Revolvers aren't great air service guns. And they already have 12 German Lugers. To put this in context, the Dutch Naval Air Service was not very big. They determined that to fully equip the service with handguns that it needed, they needed 40 handguns. That was it. Well, they have 12 because there was a German submarine that got stranded on the Dutch coast and was abandoned or was interned. I don't know the exact details of it, but the Dutch procured 12 P04 Navy Lugers. That's the version with the 6-inch barrel. It's a really cool, unusual pattern of the Luger that the German Navy adopted. And the Dutch get 12 of these guns. They're like, that's pretty good. And in 1918, they're arranging a larger trade deal with Germany. The Germans need horses and just straight up raw metal for industrial use. The Dutch have some of that stuff, and the Dutch want airplanes for their new air service. So they're making a deal with Germany. They throw in 28 additional pistols to get from DWM in Germany. The deal goes through. They get their 28 additional P04 Navy Lugers, and voila, the Dutch Naval Air Service is in good shape for small arms. Now, in 1922, the Dutch military would adopt the FN 1903 in 9mm Browning long as their standard issue sidearm. That goes in later on. The Dutch Army will adopt the Luger. There's a whole story about the Army almost adopting the Luger prior to World War I. I've got video on that in the description text below, but it doesn't quite work out. It's a complicated story. Ultimately, when we fast forward to 1928, a lot of the Dutch Navy is still equipped with revolvers. They had Lugers, but it was for the Naval Air Service, for pilots and observers, and not very many of the guns. Most of the officers and NCOs still have revolvers. In 1928, they decide they really want to update to something more modern, like a semi-automatic Luger. Of course, by this time, the Dutch Army has some Lugers, the Dutch East Indies have Lugers, the Germans have Lugers. The Luger is clearly a popular gun. It's clearly a good gun. The Army has adopted the Luger new model 1906 pattern. It's got a grip safety on it. And the Navy decides we don't really want the grip safety. We like the 9mm 9x19 caliber, and it's what they had already adopted in 1918 when, by the way, they designated the Luger as Automatic Pistol Nr.1. The FN 1903 became Automatic Pistol Nr.2 in Dutch service. But 1928, the Navy's looking at Lugers. They go, let's just take the exact same thing that the German Army is using. So the German P08 Luger is purchased by the Dutch Navy for NCOs, for commissioned officers, for musicians, interestingly, and also for naval aviators who don't already have an automatic pistol. The guys who have revolvers at this point, well, you're going to get a Luger as well. And this will start more than a decade of Luger purchases from Germany. They only get 77 of them in 1928, but they set up a continuing purchase, and they'll get basically a few more Lugers every year to expand out the Navy's small arms supply. So let's take a look at specifically what they did, because while this is mechanically the same as a P08, it does have some different markings on it. These are all 4-inch barreled 100mm barrels. They're all chambered for 9x19mm. The Dutch didn't do any 7.65 Luger or anything else weird like that. And they are the German P08 pattern. So there's no grip safety. There is a lug for a shoulder stock, which didn't ever get used. Now, the initial production, this is in 1939, the very last year that the Dutch actually got any of these guns. The first year, in 1928, and in fact through 1930, the guns were actually manufactured by a company called Berlin Karlsruhe Industriewerke, or BKIW. This is a company that took over production from DWM after World War I, when DWM was pretty much gutted in the aftermath of the war. Now, in 1930, BKIW sells its Luger production, or transfers its Luger production tooling and assembly line to Mauser. And from 1930 on, or 1931 on, these guns are shipped with, or are assembled by Mauser. Now, there's a series of markings that we will see. This is a very late one, so I'll get to these markings in a minute. At first, the guns in 1928 start with serial number 1. They start with DWM marked toggles because, well, BKIW still has a large supply of manufactured parts that they're working with, and they start with crown over N proof marks. Once they hit serial number 1485, that crown N becomes a crown U, as just German proofing standards change. These were never Waffenamt guns because they weren't made for the German military. Once you get to about 1937, serial number 2130, that's when Mauser has taken over production, and at this point they've run out of old parts, so they start using new production parts, including toggles that are now marked with the Mauser powder barrel logo. Now, the serial numbers get a bit weird in 1938, and this is weird only to a really detail-oriented, nerdy collector, but you'll see this one has a V suffix. It's 2436 V. And in 1938, the Germans add a V to the serial number, and this happens at 2330. They start adding the V. Now, German military production is all done in 4-digit blocks with a letter suffix. During the interwar period, the V series block is where basically all of the export contracts go. And what's interesting about this one is there was this pre-existing serial number range for the Dutch. They kept using the exact same numbers, they just added a V. But at the same time, they had another pre-existing V suffix serial number range, and specifically it would be guns that were made for export to Portugal. And there are a couple hundred of the Dutch guns that have the exact same serial number as guns that were being made at the same time for the Portuguese. So 2330V through 2654V, which is the last of the Dutch guns that was delivered, those serial numbers are all duplicated. There's a Dutch example, and there's also a Portuguese example. So 1939 is the last year that these guns were delivered to the Dutch. There was procurement in 1940. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but none of them were actually delivered. Now, if we look at the marking features here, the Dutch guns are marked with rust. That's the safety marking. And it just tells you which direction is safe. That's safe. Then we also have a marking on the extractor, which functions as a loaded chamber indicator. That's hard to see. There's some gunk in the lettering there, but it says geladen, which is Dutch for loaded. So those are the two specific markings that are unique to the Dutch contract guns. And beyond that, what you have is a very nice pre-war condition, high quality Luger P08 pattern of pistol. A lot of the surviving Dutch Navy Lugers like this one are actually in really good shape because they didn't see that much actual combat use. These weren't Dutch East Indies KNIL guns that saw a lot of hard use in a really harsh climate. These were guns with the Dutch Royal Navy, and they generally spent their time locked away in arms lockers because there wasn't a lot of combat use for the guns. The Dutch Navy didn't get in a lot of fights. In fact, it's really funny. There was a rather significant mutiny incident in 1933 on a Dutch cruiser in which the Lugers that the officers had didn't actually see any use because they were stashed away in arms lockers during the mutiny and the officers couldn't get to them. And humorously, the solution to this for the Dutch Navy wasn't to have the guys keep their guns on them at all time. It was to actually adopt another gun. They adopted the Sauer 1930, which is a little compact 32, as an officer's self-defense pistol. That became automatic pistol number 3 in Dutch service. specifically for the officers to carry in case of something like a mutiny, despite the fact that they already had perfectly good Lugers that just happened to be locked away in storage. At any rate, the Dutch would purchase a total of 2,654 of these guns by the time World War II broke out. The Dutch planned to be neutral in World War II. They announced their neutrality. Germany actually gave them a guarantee of neutrality, and then in May 1940 invaded them anyway. And at that point, the Dutch had just kind of started upping their military procurement. They kind of looked at this as like, no matter what we do, we're not going to be able to stop any invasion by one of the great powers, so maybe why bother? But 38 and 39, they started spending more money on the military anyway. And they had actually ordered 1,000 more Lugers for the Dutch Navy in 1940. 600 of those were completed and ready to ship by the time the Germans invaded. They did not, no surprise, they did not actually ship to the Dutch. The Wehrmacht just yoinked those guns for its own use instead. So the end of Dutch receipt of Luger pistols from Germany was 1939. So this is one of our actually quite late production, last year of receipt Dutch Navy Lugers. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the backstory here on the Dutch Navy. Big thanks to Morpheus for giving me access to this really nice example to film and show to you guys. Thanks for watching.